Hey, I'm Chris from Make Everything. Today I'm going to show you how you can easily make floating shelves just like this with just a couple of simple tools. Check it out. All right, real quick before we get started, I just want to talk about the basis of this project, which is to make a simple pair of floating shelves without using anything really specialized. Now, in the past, I've made other floating shelf videos, one where I welded a bracket, the other one where I made a bracket out of wood, but obviously there's always been criticism over some of the higher end tools that I have here at my shop. Now, this is a professional shop, so I have professional tools, but this video I'm going to use totally basic stuff that pretty much anyone that's involved in woodworking has, which is a drill, a palm router, and a table saw. Very, very simple stuff. The drill bits I'm using are these Wood Owl overdrive bits. This isn't sponsored by them or anything. Izzy Swan recommended these. They're really great. And then instead of using a drill press, which I know a lot of people don't have because they can be kind of large, I'm going to be using one of these spring-loaded drill guides. I'm just using a 12-volt drill, and then I'm going to be using a battery-powered palm router, but obviously you could use any old palm router. So that being said, you don't need a lot to build this. The brackets that I'm using are made out of steel, but I bought them on Amazon. I'll throw a link down below to where I got them from. They're not very expensive, and this is a pretty simple project. So let's get into it and make some shelves. All right, so to make these shelves, I'm going to be using some rough sawn hemlock that I picked up near my property in upstate New York. This is a nice material. It is rough sawn, and I mean really rough. It comes straight from the sawmill, and generally it's pretty wet. Now, this has been sitting for well over a year in my shop, so it's dry enough to make something out of, and I'm going to be breaking it down and basically getting a clean edge with the table saw. Now, you don't need a table saw for this. You could definitely use a circular saw for this, or if you were to buy material that wasn't rough sawn, you probably wouldn't even need to do this step. Now, this material is about 2 inches thick, and the brackets that I'm going to use require about maybe like 1 3/4 inches to sit fully behind the shelf. So if you're using 3/4 inch material, you'll have to probably do a glue up, but you can see I just took some 80 grit sandpaper and sanded off a lot of those saw marks and made these smooth, and now I'm just filling some cracks with some medium CA glue to sort of stabilize them and keep these shelves from moving around. I'm using my miter saw to cut these things to length, and so far I've processed these down basically to what you could get at a lumber supply that was already dressed. Now, I'm not using my planer or joiner here because, again, I'm trying to keep this very simple, and I'm just using a sander with 80 grit paper to get me down to a nice, consistent, and smooth finish. I'm going to be sanding these up to 180 before I apply the finish, and then eventually with a quick 320 for that last coat, but you don't need a planer to get these things smooth. Now, obviously, they're not going to be as flat without a planer and without using a flattening jig, but they're going to serve the purpose of being smooth, which for this case is going to work out just fine. Now, I'm using Total Boat Gleam, which is a varnish for the coating on the shelves. Now, if you're going to use Total Boat Gleam, you have to put a couple layers of the gloss on, even if you're going for a satin finish. The gloss acts as a sealer, and then after you are done with a few coats of that, you put the satin on as a final coat to get a satin finish if that's what you're going for. I am going to be doing a satin, so I'm going to be going through that process of putting on a couple of coats and then going with that final coat. Now, I'm using these little staining triangles to go through and flip these over as I go, and I'm applying the coats pretty thin with the grain, you know, making sure that I follow the instructions on the can on how to properly get these things sealed up. Now, you may be wondering why I haven't added the brackets yet. It's because I was waiting for them to come in the mail from Amazon, and once that stain had dried, I'm able to actually do the work to install the brackets. Now, obviously, at this point, I basically just got 2 blocks of wood, so this is the important part to pay attention to in how to install brackets like this. Now, you can see I just screwed 2 2x4s together, and then I screwed them down to my table and clamped them. This is a great way to hold a piece of wood like this vertically so you can drill on the edge. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning, I'm not using my drill press for this. I am going to be using this drilling guide, which I got this one from Amazon. This is made by Milescraft. It's pretty good. And I'm drilling these little pieces of wood to the side just basically to hold it in place so that it's dead center on the shelf no matter what. Now, you're going to see it wiggling a little bit left and right, which means I'm not drilling perfectly square to the piece, but because I'm using a slightly oversized drill bit, that's going to be totally fine, and I'm getting definitely straight enough that these aren't going to have any issue. You'll see in the very end, I wound up kind of shimming the pins on one of them with some tape, which compensates for any kind of rock or, oversize that hole may be. Now the drill bit that I'm using is not deep enough to hide the entire pin, so I have to use a little extension, which is basically just a 1/4 inch hex bit extension on my drill. But once you've got that hole, you know, about 80% there, the bit will sort of guide itself straight from that point forward, so you don't have to worry about doing the rest of it by hand. Now, the big thing to be careful here is make sure you get all the chips out of the hole before you keep drilling. A drill bit like this has a tendency to make a lot of big chips, and if you go too hard without pulling the chips out, you can seize the bit in there and it will be really difficult to get it out. Next thing I did was drop in the bracket and then traced it so that I could make an idea of kind of what I need in order to make my routing template. Now, the routing template is not anything complicated. This is just a 3/4 inch thick piece of plywood. I drill 2 holes in the corresponding spots, and then I trace it with a pencil so that I can go ahead and cut it out with a jigsaw. Now, you don't necessarily need to do this step, but it'll make your life a lot easier than freehand routing for that bracket, especially if your piece of wood isn't that thick. You're definitely going to want to make sure you don't go out and blow out the edge. So by making a template like this, which is just an exact, you know, replica of the outside perimeter of the metal bracket, I can then take a pattern bit and I can run around on the inside and get a perfect recessed channel for this metal bracket to fit in. The cool thing about this is that you only have to make this template once, and then once that's done, you can go through and make as many of these shelves as you possibly could want. Now this first shelf I routed in 2 passes because I really wasn't sure how much depth I needed and how far I really wanted to go with this pattern bit. But when I go to do the second shelf, you'll see that I just do it all in 1 pass. The hemlock's not particularly hard, so you really could kind of do it in 1 pass with the pattern bit, and you can see I'm sort of just testing it and making sure that the bracket's going to fit. First thing I notice is that the pinholes actually aren't drilled deep enough, and I think actually in this case there was just some wood chips stuck inside those holes. It's very hard to evacuate chips that deep inside of a hole like that. So I go back, make my depth a little bit deeper, and then I can just continue to go through and route the back side of this shelf. The really nice thing about using a template like that is that you can see I screwed it directly into the back of the shelf, so I don't have to clamp it. And then by doing that, I don't have to worry about the routing process at all. You could do a ton of these in very little time with very little effort if you were using that router template. And like I said, once you make one of these, if you keep buying the same brackets, you could use it over and over again. So I'm going to keep that bracket, keep that template, and I'll use it next time I buy these brackets. Now, working on the second shelf, I did a little bit different of a method here to line up my little guides, which was take the brad point on that drill bit and hammer it into the center of the shelf and then screw my guides on. And then I can go through the same process again. I'm going to drill out the side of the shelf, taking my time, making sure I clear the chips, kind of pecking as I drill and trying to keep that drill guide as square and straight as possible. Then I'll go ahead and make sure that I drill out the final depth with my hand drill. In this case, I have to be careful not to go through the front of the shelf because I am getting pretty close, but I was able to do it with some marks that I had drawn on the bit. I screw in my template, pull out the shelf bracket, and then I can take my router and vacuum and go ahead and repeat the process by routing out the back side of the shelf. Super simple process, very, very easy to do. And, you know, like I said, a palm router is a very basic tool that a lot of shops have that'll make this totally possible. Now, if you didn't have a palm router, technically you could just have the bracket sit against the wall and you may not notice it against the back of a shelf because it is relatively thin. I think it's about a 1/4 inch thick. So you could probably get away with maybe adding some sides to your shelf and then just drilling the holes and installing the bracket in that way. Now, once I had layered up a bunch of coats of that finish, I did my final coat in the satin like I mentioned. So I peel off the tape that was protecting the front edge, sand it with 320, and then do one final coat. I'm also using a tack cloth here to make sure that there's no residue left over from the finish that I sanded off, which you want these things to be very clean and dry before you apply that final coat of finish to get the smoothest results possible. Now I'm applying a light coat here and I'm making sure that I get it on all the edges so that I can get that really nice glassy finish. And these are going to be in a kitchen, so they won't need to be refinished or recoated in any way. They'll just hold up like that. Now, the wall I was mounting these on was tile, and I'm not going to go too far into the details of mounting onto a wall or onto tile. There's a lot of different videos on YouTube you can find about anchors and different things. Now I was trying to find some studs behind it, but ultimately I wasn't really able to get a good grab, so I used some high quality anchors, and you can see I used tape for my layout and actually had to shim the bottoms of the brackets to make them sort of tip upward because I oversized those holes. It helped these shelves sit nice and level. So what's nice about using a bracket like this is you can stick the tips of shims underneath the bottom sides of the brackets and then put those screws in the top, and you can get them to cant upwards, and then you can get you know, kind of a little tighter fit if you need it, or you can kind of pitch these in either way. Now, I mentioned earlier I had to sort of shim the pins. I used some of my green tape on there, and I did not use any fasteners to keep these on the brackets because I want them to be removable. Once they were done, my friend was able to put the stuff they wanted on there, and in the end I think these things came out really nice. They totally complement the kitchen and they look beautiful. Real simple. All right, that about does it for this video. These things came out great. Like I said, really simple. I basically just used the table saw, a drill, the router, all very basic tools. You can buy a DIY toolkit from Home Depot for very little money to make something just like this. These were even rough sawn material, so if you went and got something that was already processed, it'd be that much easier. I'll throw a link down in the description of where I got the brackets that I bought on Amazon. They worked out pretty good. I kind of wish they had a couple more holes in them, but I think that overall they'd be good for a lot of different purposes. I think if you were making these on your own, you might want to cut down those metal rods because they were a little bit long, and I got close to popping out the outside of the shelf. But overall, these came out great. I think they look really nice in the kitchen. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment down below if you have any questions. Like I said, there'll be links below where you can get these brackets and stuff like this down there. If you want to see what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, follow me right here at Make Everything Shop on Instagram. And shout out to Total Boat for the finish that I used on these, which is going to hold up for a really long time. Again, I'm Chris Zeff for Make Everything. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.